No matter how much you try and no matter how much you beat yourself up about what you've eaten, when you struggle with binge eating and disordered eating, it can lead you to wonder if you might have a food addiction. And you might be asking, is food addiction even real? By the end of this video, you'll have a better understanding of your urges, food science, and how it impacts your challenges with binge eating. Let's be honest, managing an eating disorder can be a lonely journey. For in-depth information and strategies for managing your eating disorder, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell in the corner so you're notified when we publish a new video every Wednesday. I'm Meredith MacKenzie of Parallel Wellness. I'm a registered clinical counselor, eating disorders therapist, and doctoral graduate student. In my work with hundreds of clients with eating disorders, I've helped them to loosen the grips of their eating disorder so they can find freedom from food and compensatory behaviors. Now it's your turn. And before we get started, I want to provide a bit of a disclaimer. This video is for information and educational purposes only. If you are concerned that you may be struggling with an eating disorder or addiction of any type, please seek the support of a physician, dietitian, or therapist who specializes in eating disorders or substance abuse if that is your concern. Today I'm going to be sharing information from Dr. Christopher Fairbairn's book, Overcoming Binge Eating. If you enjoyed the information in this video and are curious about getting a copy of his book for yourself, I've provided a link in the description box down below where you can get yourself a copy. Anyone who struggles with binge eating will unfortunately be familiar with the sense of loss of control and the strong urges to eat associated with binge eating. And because of this, it's not a far leap to wonder, could binge eating be the cause of a food addiction? And when I cover topics like this, I like to break it down a bit. So why might we think that binge eating is food addiction? And the literature on this really turns to Overeaters Anonymous, which is similar to Alcoholics Anonymous, which approaches binge eating from the addiction model. And essentially they copy and paste what they have in AA and put it into Overeaters Anonymous. The premise of the addiction model applied to binge eating is that people who binge are biologically vulnerable to eating certain foods, such as sugars and starches, leading to addiction when they eat them. These foods are toxic to them, and therefore the person cannot control themselves when they eat these foods. And because it's the result of biological vulnerability, there's no cure for this food addiction. Now again, I want to provide you a little bit more background information about Alcoholics Anonymous and Overeaters Anonymous. These programs are support groups that are run by people who have lived experience with overeating or substance abuse. And while there are many benefits to these programs, they're not necessarily scientifically based. And this is the point in the video where I'm going to let you know that food addiction has actually been debunked by scientists over and over again. Food addiction is not real. And you might be asking, wait a minute, why does it feel like I'm addicted then when I feel like I'm out of control and I'm stuck in a binge eating cycle? And it makes sense that you're asking yourself this question because there are some similarities between binge eating disorder and addiction to substances. And these include, for one, you'll recognize that you experience cravings and urges to engage in this behavior. You can feel like you've lost control over the behavior. You might find that you're preoccupied with thoughts about eating and planning the next binge. And you might use binge eating as a way of relieving tension and stress and managing emotions. There may be times that you deny the severity of your binge eating to other people or even to yourself. And one of the most frustrating parts of recovery is that even though you dislike the binge eating, it can persist and you continue to do it, even though you struggle with it being a problem. And finally, even when you've tried many times to stop, it can feel like your efforts are unsuccessful and the behavior continues. However, if we focus on these similarities between binge eating and substance addiction, we oversimplify eating disorders and we oversimplify binge eating. Yes, there are similarities, but there are also vast differences that cause eating disorders to not be placed within the same category as substance abuse. And as a result, treatment of binge eating disorder is very different than treatment of an addiction. So we don't want to miss these unique aspects of binge eating disorder. Now, comment below and let me know what binge eating is like for you. And if you've ever questioned if you had a food addiction, are there certain parts of what I've just discussed that feel like the addiction model fits for what you're experiencing? I'm really curious about what your experience is like. So now let's review why food addiction isn't real and why binge eating is not comparable to an addiction. First, when we binge eat, we don't solely consume foods from a specific class of foods. Binge eating is identified as eating an abnormally large amount of food, comparable to what you would normally eat, in a short amount of time. And this criteria is not about specific foods that you're eating during this time period. And while it's true that many people have certain foods that they prefer to eat while they binge eat, or there's specific foods that can be really triggering for them and can lead them to binge eat, the act of binge eating is not solely focused on these specific foods. Binge eating can happen with all types of foods. Second, a big difference between people who struggle with binge eating and those that struggle with substance addiction is that there is a strong drive to avoid the behavior with binge eating. Ultimately, people don't want to binge eat. With substance addiction, there's often a great deal of ambivalence or uncertainty about whether or not you want to stop the addictive behavior. While other people in your life may view it as a problem, the person who's experiencing the substance addiction might not, and they might really struggle with this in the process of their recovery. Very differently, people who struggle with binge eating often spend a great deal of their time and their thought processes focused on avoiding binge eating, to the point that they actually restrict their eating at some point in the day to avoid the binge. And my third main point is related to this, and it's that the act of binge eating is actually something that's quite unpleasant and even scary for people much of the time. With an eating disorder, restrictive eating and binge eating is directly related to how a person feels about themselves and how they evaluate their body shape and size and their self-worth. And this relationship is cyclical, meaning that negative feelings about ourselves and our body shape and size can actually trigger or perpetuate us to continue to engage in binge eating behaviors. And this vulnerability can actually be part of what leads us to engage in binge eating behaviors in the first place. The same relationship does not exist for substance addiction. It's actually almost the opposite dynamic. The person may actually want to continue to use substances, and abstinence and avoidance can actually help manage the symptoms of the substance abuse disorder. Well, this actually makes things worse for binge eating with binge eating disorder or bulimia nervosa. In today's video, we discuss the controversial topic of food addiction and whether binge eating is similar to an addiction. This is a meaty topic, so if there's something you'd like to know more about this topic, please leave a comment in the comment section down below about what you're hoping to learn more about. You might also want to check out my video on the binge eating cycle. In this video, I explain more about the science of how our bodies respond to binge eating, which I believe is a better explanation for that food addiction feeling that many people who struggle with binge eating can relate to. Now, if you're looking to get started with your eating disorder recovery journey, I've created a mindful eating log, which I use in my practice with clients who struggle with binge eating disorder very frequently. I provided a link in the description box down below where you can go and download a copy for yourself. Now, you're gonna wanna go and check out the rest of my videos on this channel about eating disorders and binge eating. And again, I provided a link in the description box down below where you can go and find some of these videos. Now, if you like controversial topics, you're gonna wanna stay tuned next week where I'm gonna start my series on orthorexia. So if you're curious about that, stay tuned. Now, if you've liked this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with anyone who you think would benefit from learning more about binge eating disorder and maybe even curiosity about food addiction, and if that's even a real thing. I look forward to seeing you in the next video on Wednesday.